All right, welcome back to Hardball. There's a new documentary out next Friday about the 2004 death of professional football star turned Army Ranger Pat Tillman in Afghanistan. Here's a clip from that film.
The reporter received an anonymous leak. It was a copy of a top-secret internal communique known as a P4 memo, sent just 7 days after Pat's death and a full month before the family learned of the fratricide.
The P4 memo states they must warn the president about this because they'll be giving speeches and that they shouldn't be embarrassed if the circumstances of Pat's death become public.
He set aside a career in athletics and...
The warning seemed to work. In a speech given 2 days before the memorial service, the president avoided the very details of Pat's death that his speechwriters had requested.
It's like our suspicions in the beginning were very much validated by that P4 memo. These generals had plenty of time to make sure that we as a family were told the truth, but they chose not to tell us.
The P4 memo clearly showed that while America was being told the valorous account of Pat's death, the entire chain of command not only knew it was a lie, but were urgently concerned about the implications should the truth get out.
So today, more than 6 years after his death, are there more answers or more questions about what happened? We're joined now by Pat Tillman's mother, Mary. She joins us from San Jose, California. So I got to ask you this simple question. Do you know how your son was killed in Afghanistan?
Not really. I mean, we have several stories, several versions. There's several scenarios that we can imagine, but no, we don't know exactly what happened to him.
Why do you think you don't have the real story? Do you think he was a political pawn?
Well, I think he was used for propaganda purposes, and I think that that's, you know, kind of a frightening thing to use a soldier and lie about his death to the family and to the country, to promote, you know, patriotic feeling about a war. I think that that's outrageous.
Well, here's some more from the film, which has to do with how the military was trying to push for a specific tone of his funeral.
Today, 3 men from Fort Lewis walked slowly to the house to tell his wife Marie they care.
In fact, the casualty assistance officers were there to compel Marie to sign off on a funeral at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors.
They were sort of pushing for a military funeral, which was not what his wishes were.
During basic training, Pat had a premonition that if he died, he might be used as a public relations stunt. So he'd smuggled a copy of his final wishes home to Marie.
I really had to kind of push back on them. They were just sort of proceeding as if this was the way things were going to happen. Probably thinking that, you know, I was so grief-stricken that I would just go along with it.
That's the first episode, in a way, before Pat's body is even cold. The death didn't just belong to the family. That this was bigger than the family.
So in his own handwriting, he had said, I do not want a military funeral, and he was asked specifically about being buried at Arlington.
Right. Yeah, all the soldiers are supposed to plan for their, you know, their funerals and, you know, what they wish. And his wishes were to not have a military funeral. He didn't consider himself, you know, that wasn't his identity. And so that's not what he chose.
Look, you've spent a lot of time on this, trying to figure out what happened. In the best way that you can explain, what do you believe happened? What do you think happened on the battlefield to your son? And what do you think happened behind the scenes at the Pentagon, at the White House, from what you understand after all of this research that you've done?
Well, first of all, I think it needs to be clear to everyone that there was really no criminal investigation after Pat's death. It was a fratricide. You know, the medical examiner in Maryland was told before Pat's body arrived that he was killed in an ambush. And the medical examiner was suspicious as soon as he saw the wounds. He did not believe that Pat was killed by the enemy because he said, you can't shoot that accurately with an AK-47. So he was suspicious at that point, and he asked for a criminal investigation. And the adjutant general refused, saying that, you know, they were satisfied with the information that they had. So there really was no criminal investigation. So it's hard to say what happened. All the evidence was destroyed. His uniform was destroyed. They even tried to burn the Kevlar vest, which, you know, could not be burned, but they did try. And evidence is, you know, this is evidence in a fratricide situation, in a homicide situation. You know, Rumsfeld himself had sent a memo in December of 2003 that the uniforms,
at the time, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, that he. You know, that the uniforms and equipment of the fallen soldier should go back to Maryland, back to the medical examiner, especially in cases of suspected homicide, fratricide, or suicide. So the fact that they destroyed this evidence is very disturbing, and the fact that the medical examiner asked for a criminal investigation and it was turned down, that's very upsetting. So we really don't know exactly what happened to him, but we do know that the soldiers that were in this canyon were being shot at by, it was a kind of an harassing ambush from what they can understand. And I believe that once these soldiers in this first vehicle got out of that canyon, they were no longer afraid and they were no longer frightened. I think they were simply excited and they wanted to be in a firefight and they wanted to shoot. And they shot up that ridgeline. They could have potentially killed all of the soldiers on the ridgeline along with civilians. So I think it was probably a less to fight, absolutely pure negligence, and no one in that situation was ever held accountable.
Have you spoken with any of the other soldiers that were with your son that day?
Yes, I have, and they all are appalled. In fact, there's statements in the some of the investigations. These soldiers, the vehicle behind this particular vehicle that shot at Pat and the others, they were shooting so irresponsibly and so wildly, they nearly shot the soldiers in the vehicle behind them. And the soldier, one of the soldiers that was shot, he was the radio operator. He was wounded, seriously wounded, and he saw them shooting at him, and he tried to, get them to stop by waving his arms, and, to no avail. And after he was taken to the hospital, he was there were armed guards put around him so he wouldn't talk, because he saw that he was shot at by his own men.
More of my interview with Mary Tillman after this, including her thoughts on John McCain and General Stanley McChrystal. You're watching Hardball on MSNBC.